Please go ahead. We are live now.
Yeah. So you may start now.
Good afternoon. It's my privilege to meet the young, future, bright leaders of India. Mr. Chakradhar Gade, Country Delight, Mr. Prasoon Gupta, co-founder Satvico, Mr. Suhail Samir, Group President, Bharat Pay, and many distinguished participants and guests who have joined us today. Prime Minister of India has given a call for vocal for local. And it has been his vision to have a startup India. And all of you have actually demonstrated the strength of Indian youth. And people who have joined us today would like to learn from your inspirational journey that you have started. There are many learnings, lessons that you can impart to the young Indians who can actually, over the years, carry India's flag all over the globe. As it is said by many people, that if you want to be a global player, you have to be first big local player. So I would not actually stand between you and the participants. I would request all of you, although I have your biodatas and details and so on and so forth, but I would actually rather you shared your own introduction with the people, your own journey, and the challenges that you experience in your different areas in your journey so far, and the challenges that you see going forward. So I will start with Chakradhar to give his experience and journey so far, and once he shares his experience, then we can ask Prasoon, and then Suhail can come forward, and we will keep this whole session interactive going forward, so that people can learn from your experience. So over to you, Chakradhar.
Thank you very much, Anil sir, for having us here. It's a genuine privilege to be here. I won't say that we've achieved a lot to talk so much about ourselves, but at least some of the mistakes we've learned over the years, maybe I'll share a bit of that and hopefully be of help to people out there. Before that, I would love to talk a little bit about Country Delight and what we do, and then also share a bit about our early days journey and where we are today and what we are trying to do, and some of the challenges that we've seen in the past and that we are seeing today. So Country Delight is a direct-to-home consumer brand. We have the philosophy of giving natural products which advocate natural living directly to the doorstep of our customers. We are milk is our entry into a household. We serve fresh cow and buffalo milk directly from farms to the doorstep within 24 to 36 hours. And around that, we've built a bouquet of products with the same philosophy of delivering pure, fresh and minimally processed products directly to the customer's doorstep. We serving nearly 1.5 lakh houses, and we serve across some of the key metropolitans in India. And a little bit about our journey. Me and my partner, both of us started this business back in 2011 as a part-time affair, and then I came into it full time. Both of us came into it full time at around 2013. So, and the idea was quite random. It was not like there was a big business plan or anything. It was just the need to do something on your own more than anything. And coming from finance profession, थोड़ा मतलब ज़्यादा दिमाग लगा दिया Excel पे, and somehow thought setting up a cattle farm is a very, very good idea. But we realized that the wisdom of the farmers who've done this 20, 30 years, 40 years in their lives is far higher than what we can come and teach people to do. And slowly then started seeing what farmers are doing, how to add value to them, and then build good cold chain and tech systems over and above that, and build a good and also parallelly work on the customer front to sort of give a good product to our customers. And it was a big struggle until 2017. We were fully bootstrapped as a business. We had no money. Whatever was purely coming from our savings. So early days helped us stick to the good basics of business, trying to survive one day at a time. So there was no room for thinking too big. But fortunately, the whole coming from offices where there were AC rooms to a place where there was no AC, having an AC office was a big aspiration for 2-3 years in the business. And somehow as that slowly happened, we sort of built a good business. And then I learned some of our most important lessons through that period. And thankfully, business has grown ever since we've raised some institutional money about in 2017. And some of the most difficult things that we've learned the hard way was one. When we were very young in our business, the idea was to always have short-term goals. Keeping a very long-term vision is very important, but having short-term goals was more important than that, because survival is always dependent on achieving your short-term targets. So that was one very big thing that helped us. Being very frugal in our approach helped us build a good business model which didn't require too much money to grow, and hence we were able to scale as a business well. Adopting tech has a huge role in the world of today, because whatever a new age entrepreneur comes today to do has to solve some problem of the past, and tech is a big enabler from for the new age thinking today versus what people used to think in the past. So that gives a big advantage in your business when you see how to leverage tech. And lastly, having a very strong team. And when it comes to team, we have again taken a very, very frugal bottoms up approach. The idea was always to hire a few people, but people who love their jobs, people who are very ownership driven. And thankfully, we have one of the lowest attritions even among the community that we see. These were some of the few basics that helped us build a decent business over the years. And once we received money also, the idea was always to keep survival first, then growth. That was always the thought process that has helped us navigate some tricky times in the business. And when we were thinking of growing, the idea was always to think scalably while being frugal with our resources. So their tech played a huge role in our entire growth journey. And most important, apart from all of this, none of us come from the milk background or even this manufacturing background. So again, being very, very customer focused and customer obsessed has helped us build this business well over time. So when you don't know what you have to give to your customer, the idea was always to listen to what most of your customers are saying and trying to solve those problems. So whether it was customers used to say milk inconsistent hai, customers used to say milk mein thoda smell aa raha hai, and those were problem statements which we have to solve. And some problems were solved with good processes and systems. Some processes were solved with tech, and some processes were solved by pure diligence in understanding what the customer wants, and where the effort required to solve it was very less. And today, whatever we do is purely customer centric and customer focused. So anything that we look at has to work for a large segment of our customers, and only then we do it. So this has helped us even like identify what price we can sell the product at, how to think of packaging, what to spend on packaging, what to spend on processing, what to spend on logistics. It does define and design a good and efficient business model. And some of the challenges that we see now are sort of growing this bigger. So when it's very easy when you are a small team trying to figure things out, the communication is very lean, you can move very fast. But as you grow bigger as an organization, it's very important for you to be as lean and as nimble, and also to have processes and systems that carry these basics into your company as you grow forward. And that comes from obsessing a lot about your organization culture, what helped you in the earlier part, how to scale it, keeping your customer thinking, customer obsession intact, and trying to build that across every level of the company and organization. And broadly, building this into a scalable organization where irrespective of how it is, the organization should be a self-sustaining growth engine. That's where a lot of our current thoughts and efforts are going. I hope I've been able to give some basic perspective about what we are doing, and some of our learnings, and what are the challenges we face currently.
Thank you very much, Chakradhar. It was very nicely, in a very succinct form, you put up your journey so far. Before I begin to raise further questions, let me now move to Prasoon to give his journey so far.
Thank you, Anil sir. Well, I am one of the very happy and very early customers of Country Delight. So really proud to be associated with that brand. So out of those 1.5 lakh families, I think one of my family is somebody who kind of drinks your milk every day. So I think we call Chakradhar sir as Chakri sir. So Chakri sir explained it quite well. So for me, I think this is my second journey as an entrepreneur. I am a graduate of IIT Roorkee, graduated in 2009 as an engineer, as a civil engineer. And my first company that I started along with 4 of my friends, that was started when I was in my final year at my engineering. And when you are in engineering, when you are actually studying those 4 years of engineering, you somehow start to believe that there are things around you that need to be changed. I mean, I went to one of the most beautiful institutions in the entire world, and I somehow also realized that there were a few things which really needed to be kind of added on to that layer of the brilliant education and the brilliant atmosphere that we were given. And somehow we wanted to change that entire education, the way it was delivered in 2008, 2009. So my first company I started in 2008 December, and that company was in EdTech. So today, I think all of us know what EdTech is. We see like billion-dollar companies being built around us in EdTech almost every day. In 2008 and 9, I think this was not something which was true. I remember that in 2010, we were already having around 10,000 paid students or customers across some of these places across North India. And we went to a VC to ask for some money, initial money. And the response we got then, Prasoon, the largest company in India in EdTech is Educom. And at that point of time, they were doing what, 400 crores of top line. So they saw this entire opportunity as uninvestable for the next 50 years. And probably I'm just talking like 10 years later, and everybody has gone mad about EdTech. So I think what I realized with my first experience, we did a beautiful work. We created content around skill development, and we reached out to almost 100,000 students across North India. We had built a platform and technology which was a little ahead of its time, I would say. but I think the kind of impact that we created in terms of what we were able to deliver as value to those people. Now all those students, a lot of them, they reach out to us and tell us, we are at this point of our life, this is what you have done to our lives. It gives us that positive feeling that probably that company did not become that big. So we scaled the company and we got a strategic exit in 2012 end. We sold that company to a VC who was trying to do something on his own. He bought the platform and the content from us. But the biggest challenge that we used to face at that point of time was technology. So I'm talking about 2010 and 11, the early Flipkart days, when entrepreneurship was not a buzzword, when our mobile phones did not have 4G, not even 3G. And today, 10 years later, I mean, post pandemic, I think even my father today, he works with a company, he's 64 years of age. He never thought that he could get this chance of working from home. He's the CEO in a company and he is now working from his home and he's so happy about it. So I think internet and technology has really enabled it for all of us. We are able to spend time with our families. We are able to learn so much. We are able to network with people who are sitting even 7 seas across, So I think that was the power of technology that we realized can change the world. So after exiting that first company, in 2013, I really got this chance to travel. So because I started my first company when I was in the campus, I never got this chance to travel so much, only the business travel was happening. But during this 1 year after the exit, I got a chance to travel across India. So I traveled to almost 27 states, went to the borders in Jammu Kashmir, lived in refugee camps, and saw India in a very different way. I mean, I have this beautiful photograph where I'm playing cricket. I mean, it was on India-Pakistan border. एक खेत है इंडिया की तरफ, एक खेत है पाकिस्तान की तरफ, और उन गांव के बच्चों के साथ मैं क्रिकेट खेल रहा हूँ. And I got that feeling that the beauty that we have in India. So I also got a chance to live in California for 3 months, travel across different parts of the world. What I realized was India as a country, as a civilization, is the oldest civilization on this planet. And the only thing that we have been able to market, the best thing that we have marketed in the world, or the most marketed thing from India that has now taken over the world, is yoga. Today, yoga is something that you would find in every other household. People waking up early in the morning and following those different styles of yoga. This yoga as a science was invented in India 10,000 years ago. It was Rishi Patanjali who said that there is a term called yoga, which is basically nothing but the combination or a mixture of the human soul, the mind, the environment around you, the universe around you. And I think the world has started now believing into that fact. So inspired by this entire philosophy that we as Indians and India has so much to give to the world, we picked our food. India has science in food, which probably world doesn't know. And we thought that maybe we'll take this science from India to the globe. In India, if you go to any part of the country today, into the remotest areas, you will see that there are these superfoods which people eat, and some of the modern households have not been able to really adopt to those superfoods. So we thought that maybe we can create a brand that can revolutionize something called food yoga, which can actually take these superfoods to every home in the world and basically change the way the people live their lifestyles. When we talk about wellness, I think 80% of that wellness is food. 20% is yoga and other fitness regimes that you might follow. But if it is 80%, if it is food, then I think the food has to be good. It has to be really something which can change our lifestyles. So we took up that mission in 2014, started Satviko 1.0, like a fresh food company. We launched a chain of restaurants with the name of Satviko, opened 12 restaurants, and for the next 3-4 years, like Chakri sir said, we were almost bootstrapped. The initial money that we had put in from our own savings almost got exhausted. And we somehow realized that if the vision that we had was to take this entire concept of food yoga to every home, somehow the restaurant go-to-market was not really helping us. It was extremely capex heavy go-to-market, or the business that we were in. And every 3 years, the people used to get bored with the ambience of the restaurant, and you had to put more capex. So 2017, we pivoted our entire company to from being a fresh food company to a packaged food company. And I think since then, the journey has had its own ups and downs. We have had times when we had 500 people in the company all across India. We had distribution across different channels, and we're trying to kind of scale it. But we are burning a lot of cash. We kind of went away with that initial philosophy that we'll use a lot of technology to solve this problem of reaching out to every home. And with that challenge, we pivoted again. Now I say that we are running something called Satviko 3.0. And this new pivot came in 2019 when we were faced with like a lot of challenges in terms of almost running out of capital, almost running out of that patience. So I think we went back to our basics. We went back to adopting technology as a way to take our brand. Today, I think Satviko as a brand is a combination of community, content, products, and a lot of wellness, a lot of this food yoga at the core of it, which is basically trying to solve the lifestyle challenges for people across the globe. Today we are present across 7 countries in the world, including US, Canada, Singapore, Australia, Dubai, apart from India. And we have a small team of close to 40 people. But with these 40 people, we are trying to do some phenomenal work, some interesting work. I'm blessed to have a team which has been with me with the entire company in the worst of its times. They have faced those personal challenges along with both of us as co-founders, Ankush and myself. But I'm really glad that I got this opportunity to basically create something which I believe world will see as a revolution over the next 10 years. So thank you so much, Anil sir, for inviting me here on this.
It's a pleasure to listen to all of you. May I now move to Suhail Samir to share his journey.
Thanks, Anil. I am sort of a fake here. I think Prasun and Chakra are the real entrepreneurs. I classify myself as a employee who is paid to be an entrepreneur. Right? So this is therefore in a way my second entrepreneurial instinct as well. I set up the FMCG business for Sanjeev Goenka Group, where we launched brands like Tuyam, Dr. Vaidya, and a couple of other brands, and very similar thinking to what Prasun has been driving. We were probably half as successful as he is in building the right aura around the brand, but very simple, clean, healthy snacks was sort of the core of it. And I think my second stint, again, I've been sort of lucky enough to be at the forefront of it, is with BharatPe, where we are India's sort of first and largest merchant-oriented network for payment acceptance and their capital needs. And like BharatPe started in 2018, so we're actually only a 2.5-year-old company. I think what we've achieved is partly been luck, partly been right place, right time, and of course events like demonetization and then COVID have sort of you have to be on the right side of luck to be sort of build a real business. I always believe that, and I think we sort of got lucky on that front, right? So I think I would like talk about 4 or 5 things. I think a couple of things which we got right at BharatPe or before, and a couple of things which we sort of learned in hindsight on what we should have done differently, and hopefully will be valuable for some of the people listening, right? I think let me first start with actually a lot of people chase fads, right? And I don't think it's the best thing to do, right? So as Prasun talked about, he started EdTech when no one was thinking EdTech. A lot of the VC investors as well as institutional investors were really looking for the thing which is already blown out. So I don't know if Prasun made the right choice of like exiting that business or not, but I think there is a sort of a latent time before anything becomes mainstream, right? So and again, I believe Prasun is one of the lucky ones who chose 2 places, 2 businesses, very different businesses to each other, but both right in a way, right? When Prasun started Satviko or when I started Tuyam, no one was talking healthy food, right? Or people were talking about in surveys, I want to eat healthy, but then everyone was going back to the same fried chips, right? So and it's happened industry after industry, country after country. People start talking about a thing today and they start adopting it 5 years down the line, and it becomes mainstream 10 years down the line, right? So I think, so if when sort of fried chips were doing at their best, if someone chasing a fad would be, I will launch one more fried chips brand, and I am reasonably sure that would have not succeeded, right? So I think sometimes you have to think sort of what will become relevant 5 years out down the line when you start something, right? And it's a very similar story at BharatPe, right? Because when we started a digital payments company, everyone was going after the consumer, right? So because everyone was aware of the consumption story in India, people moving from lower middle class to upper middle class and so on. And then you had Paytm come in, you had Google Pay come in, you had Phone Pay come in, and like 500 other companies. And maybe they did it at the right time. But when we were starting BharatPe, I think starting one more consumer business to us would have been sort of suicidal, right? And we probably got the choice right on saying, if the consumer journey is sort of going to grow, where will that consumption happen from? And if it is the merchant, why is no one looking at the merchant, right? So, and that's where we started actually India's first merchant-focused payment company, where we don't even have a consumer app, and we still don't have a consumer app. You can choose any payment mode you want. You can, for all that I care, use a Paytm or a Phone Pay. As long as you pay on the BharatPe QR, merchant's life gets sorted. He doesn't pay any transaction fee, and my business grows on the back of that, right? So I think that's my sort of point one. Like fads are fads because they've been played out, right? They are not necessarily going to remain as attractive 5-10 years down the line. I think the second is, I think sometimes a lot of entrepreneurs just blindly copy paste from the US, right? Because we all believe that's where all the innovation happens. Not always the right thing. And again, I'll use sort of BharatPe as a example of why I'm saying that. A lot of the fintech companies in US actually make money on transactions, right? So you go to a store, you transact on a credit card, debit card, or any other system. The company charges you 2 to 3% to the merchant or to the consumer, and everyone is happy. It works really well because in US, you have to also put it in context that a retailer makes 25 to 30% margin. He doesn't mind sharing 2 to 3% of that if you're enabling his payment, right? You bring it back to India, a merchant makes 6% to 12% depending on what he is selling. If you are going to take away 2% of that just to enable a digital transaction, he is not going to go digital, right? So he will adopt cash, right? So, and we've all seen how India has grown on digital payments in the last 4-5 years. The NPCI has done a fantastic job of promoting UPI, but it is not NPCI coming up with any brilliant idea which led to the shift, right? The shift happened because NPCI said UPI payments are free. Any merchant accepting digital payments on UPI is free. And that sort of led the revolution, right? Because the merchant wants to accept digital money. He doesn't want to handle so much of cash. Consumer wants to pay digitally, but there is a huge resistance from the merchant side on why he should be paying 2% for something where he can simply take cash and like sort of keep the 100%, right? And it's also counterintuitive to making the economy cash free. Like imagine the 100 rupee going in circulation 50 times. 50 rupees is probably taken away by the people who are enabling the transaction, and your actual 100 rupees is only 50 now, right? So, and that's what sort of what we did right? When we started BharatPe, there was still a transaction charge on payment, and we were of the belief that in India you can't make money on transactions. You can only make money if you enable the growth of a business, right? So, so a merchant who is always cash starved, if you give him incremental 5 rupees of money to do business, and he generates 1 lakh rupees extra profit from that, he is happy to share 20,000 of that with you, right? He will give you actually a much higher rate of return if you are sort of enabling his business and enabling his growth. but he is not going to give you, like, if he accepts 10,000 rupees digitally, he is not going to give you 200 rupees out of that, right? He has the option of going back to cash. So I think you have to sort of, it's great to look at global models and contextualize them for yourself, but you have to sort of see what is relevant for a country like India. It's such a big market. There are so many opportunities everywhere you look. But you have to get the model right for India, and that's what we said. Transactions free. We will only charge merchants for things where we sort of enable his business beyond the means of his own, right? So, and that's where we sort of today are one of the largest digital lenders. We lend out around 250 crores a month to our merchants, who are very happy to give us reasonable IRRs on that, and we probably are one of the few payment companies which has a business model which at least works, right? So whether we make money or not is a problem to be seen 2 years down the line, but at least there is a reason why merchant sort of pays for you, right? So I think that's my point 2. I think my point 3 is you have to build for a target group in mind, and I think a lot of us commit the mistakes of going too wide too soon, where the real focus should be going deep, right? So if I can very easily, and a lot of people ask me, why are you not launching a consumer app now, right? Because now people know BharatPe, you've raised tons of money, your burns are in control, etc., etc. But I think there is so much to be solved on the merchant side that I will actually be doing a big disservice to the merchant as well as to my own business if I start thinking consumer at this point. And this translates not only to me, but many FMCG peers and friends. You built a great business in a particular category. Your brand stands for something. Why dilute it for a few easy bucks by going wide when the brand is not sort of ready to do that? I think the call of when to expand horizontally and how deep to go is a very important decision, where a lot of businesses are actually either scale or they sort of ruin the brand which you created over the period of time, right? I think that's something which we should be careful about. I think 2 things which we have learned the hard way, and Prasun, I think, already talked about one of them. One is it's important to be frugal, right? Sometimes when you get institutional investors in and you think you have a lot of money, you end up spending a lot more than what the business model sort of should allow, and it's a mistake. And of course, you can always point to few examples who spend tons of money and have had really red P&L statements, but have still become like multi-billion-dollar companies. But I would basically not be able to count more than 10 such companies, right? And which to me is, you have to be either so brilliant or you have to be so lucky. Otherwise, the high burn, like low revenue model does not work. And as an entrepreneur, you should not be betting on luck. You should be sort of betting on your business model playing out over a period of time, right? And if that is the way you want to go about it, I think being frugal on costs sort of is extremely important. It doesn't mean you don't spend, but be thoughtful on where you spend and where the money will generate the best return for your business, like whether it is brand building or whether it is revenue. And I think one last point, I think from my side is, which we've learned in hindsight, sometimes for growth, you shortcut a lot of the processes, and you do a lot of manual Excel sheet, धक्का मार के हो जाएगा यार, कोई बात नहीं, निकाल दे आज तो, right? So and that sort of comes and bites you a few months down the line, right? So I think what we've sort of learned again the hard way, by having to spend more than what we should have, by having to hire more people than what we should have, is it is important in, as Chakra said, to have short-term targets and short-term milestones, but you should also not lose of sight of what is that you are building from the long-term point of view, and what you are building and what you are doing for the short term. Is it in line with being able to scale in the long term, or is it counter to that, right? And if it is counter to that, it's probably better to delay a bit of growth and get the systems in place, get the processes in place, and then really scale it up, right? So I think execute short term, but I think long term is sort of my last thought. And sorry for being like going on a bit longer than what I should have, but back to you.
Thank you, Suhail, sharing your journey in such detail, and I'm sure people would have taken a lot of lessons from this. Let me now come back to Chakradhar. Chakradhar, I'm sure most people would be interested to know as to what triggered the idea of milk business.
Like I said, Anil sir, the idea was it was a little naive, to be very honest. So while working, me and my partner have saved a bunch of money. We thought we would not want it all to go away on a 1-0 opportunity. So something that we could do where there is a dividend angle out of it. So from that, the whole thought process of milk being a very high recurring revenue business, very subscription oriented business, and was one of the key things. And it's a very large target market. So when you take milk as an example, like in Delhi alone, daily 1 crore liters of milk is consumed. So it's a huge market with a very recurring revenue nature and a very strong subscription aspect in the business. And then the second thought was, how do you differentiate yourself within milk? So then it came that if you are able to give a superior quality product, then you could be able to differentiate yourself. So then the whole journey was about what is the superior quality product. Then it came to how would what would a consumer pay for this? Can you charge like double of what you're charging, and would a consumer pay? Like, will that be a large target addressable market? So from there, the whole idea of what is the market that you want to target, how big is it? Is it an opportunity where you can build a reasonably big business? So that was the next logical angle which we sort of worked on. From there it came that now from a consumer point of view, how do you make it easy for the customer? So here everything was purely customer feedback, saying that I want certain conveniences. So some conveniences were like delivering directly to the doorstep. Other conveniences were being able to manage your milk requirements well, being able to sort of pay your bills very easily, and that sort of we try to weave it into the business model itself. So when a customer wants this, you give them an app, but you encourage them to prepay. So that brought us working capital in the business. So and when once it started bringing working capital and customer was on an app, because the customer was captive, we started launching many other products around that product. So it was a 3 to 4 year journey where we started figuring out bits and pieces one at a time and started adding on it. And most of this happened in such an organic way because we were also bootstrapped as a business, because at any point of time we didn't have way too much money. So there was only one thing that you could take up at one point in time, and that used to be the the most important problem to be solved. So that is the sort of approach we took to solve this, Anilji.
See, milk is a perishable product. So getting entry into a perishable product, what are the thought process that you went through to ensure that you have minimum wastage, and how your infrastructure for demand and supply matching is done, how you will ensure that quality and in-time delivery will be made.
So again, Anilji, there was a lot of sub problems that we had to solve for getting this problem statement right. So when we started with a full stack approach where we said, from we had our own farm all the way to the door, everything that we controlled. So even if you didn't grow too much, it was a very controlled environment which you could where you could control for all the aspects of the business. Then we started adding variables because we couldn't manage the farm on our own. We started working with farmers. So when you're working with a farmer, we started understanding that what are the problems that can arise, and that sort of came from customers also, that the milk used to be inconsistent from day to day. So then we started figuring out how to maintain consistency of the product without adding anything to the product. So from then we started little bit of process innovation. Similarly, if you take last mile, those were the days when there was like morning, this whole rider ecosystem was not there at all. So initially we started with buying bikes for our delivery guys, but then that didn't work. Then slowly we started working with auto rickshaw guys, because for them morning 4 to 7 was an unemployable time, and the 300 rupees we paid during that time sort of took care of their auto rental. So then that became a scalable approach. Then we added a layer of tech, because how would you deliver, let's say, 1 lakh households daily, where every rider works on his own. So parallelly, when we started seeing this whole Uber, Ola evolve, we also started learning from that what was happening, and started building our own internal systems that help build efficiency within riders, build the entire last mile network, build good inventorization processes, all these things. But it happened over a period of 3 to 4 years, Anil sir, because it was always one problem at a time, and gradually being very survival oriented, and adding, and at the same time not losing focus on what we wanted to achieve in the medium term to the long term. These were the key things which sort of helped us build this out gradually.
It's a great learning experience. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We've lost you, Anil.
I think you've gone off mute.
Hello,
Yeah,
can you hear me now?
Now we can, yeah.
I'm sure all the participants would have had many takeaways from this journey, and how to stack up business, how to not become over ambitious, and build your business brick by brick. Chakradhar, very well put, and I'm sure people have taken notes of all the learnings that you have shared. Now let me move to Prasoon now. Prasoon, you got into from education to foods business, and you shared with us as to how suddenly from education you thought food is a great idea, but here also I would like to actually ask you the same question: that what was the trigger point? Just moving around all over the globe. Was it non-availability of good quality Indian food in the international arena, or was it the great variety that Indian cuisine provides and which is not available globally and within the country? What were the real trigger which got you into foods business, or non-availability of vegetarian food?
Yes, sir. So rightly said, Anil sir. I think a lot of this has now become a fad. We say vegan, we say gluten-free, we say high in protein. So I think a lot of these modern terms have come into the picture over the last 4 or 5 years when we talk about consumer brands. But I think the question that you asked, like why education and now why food? So I think education, because I already mentioned that I was studying in one of the most beautiful and the most premier institutions across the world, and I saw some gaps. I saw something that was not going right. So basically, I just tried to find a solution for that. I thought that maybe there is a solution that we can create. We were engineers, and we were taught to create solutions for problems around us. And I think that was the trigger point, I would say, in 2008 to start a edtech business. When I talk about the more recent foray into food, so I think there were a couple of trigger points. First, I have been cooking since I was a child. Both my parents are working. We have grown up in a middle class family, and me and my elder sister, she's just 2 years elder to me, and both of us were alone at home. And it just happened that she loved cooking, and I learned a lot of cooking from her and my mom. So when I was in college, I used to take this college canteen on rent, and I used to prepare like meals, like feast for my friends then as well. So I think the love for food was there as a foodie plus as somebody who could cook. But I think beyond that, I mean, I went to a place called Eatly. So Eatly is a chain of supermarkets. So Eatly, I visited Milan somewhere when I was trying to figure out what I should be doing next, and I was kind of amazed. Italy is a small country. It's smaller than India probably in terms of the overall area, but because of the depth of culture and heritage that Italy has, they have been able to, you know, create that, those beautiful brands in the world. A lot of these Italian brands, because of their huge soft power, they were able to get into the minds and the homes of people. So the few of the most luxurious brands in multiple categories that we know today, they were born out of Italy. I visited this supermarket called Eatly, and I was kind of stunned the way they were able to create Italian food as an experience. So if you enter a store of Italy, you would see that right from a grocery, which was authentic Italian, to basically liquor, which was also authentic Italian. They were able to create products across categories, and they were not just selling product. They were basically helping people to understand what Italian food was all about. So I think a couple of these trigger points, along with the entire fact that probably our entire science of food, which probably India has. So in India, there is this beautiful tradition that the food sciences are traditionally they are moved from generations to generations using women in the family. So women have been the treasurer of this knowledge. So we have built a huge community. We call them super women. And I think in our philosophy, we believe that like shlokas, like all our Vedas, they were never written before like what 200, 300 years back. They were actually sung to the next generation. So I think the food sciences in India, they have been actually transferred from generations to generations. The modern women in households, you would find that they learn a lot from their mothers and grandmothers. We believe that somehow this knowledge has to be given to the world in the form of community, in the form of knowledge, plus in the form of those products in those modern formats which customers can adopt. Like Chakri was saying about customers. So I think today's customer, they're extremely conscious, but they're also very modern. They're very contemporary. They may not want to eat gehu in the way it was probably consumed. They may not want to eat makhana in the way it was consumed. They may want to basically experiment with that. So I think that was the trigger that maybe food is the way. And I think one of the stories which I tell to people, obviously I don't want to go into a very religious angle of it, but in India, there is a kahavat कि मतलब आपके दिमाग का रास्ता आपके पेट से होकर जाता है. And I think we truly believe in that philosophy. Even the founder of ISKCON, Prabhupada, at the age of 65, he went to the US and he wanted to teach about Krishna to the world. Not a religion, but the concept of Krishna. And he had this strong belief that if he started sharing about Krishna to the people, like when they meet him, they will not accept it. So he created this beautiful concept that he used to offer prasad to that person. और जब वो प्रसाद खाके बंदा प्रसन्न हो जाता है, when this person got happy, now this person used to listen to Prabhupada. Whether he accepts what he said was not something which was relevant, but he used to listen to that person. So I believe when I talk about a consumer brand today, coming from the oldest civilization on the planet, food is something that can connect everybody on the globe, and that's why we chose to get into food.
Great. It's a very beautifully put up. Now, food business has gone through huge challenge during COVID-19 time. So what are the challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome those challenges?
So rightly so, like any other business, 2020 was a difficult but a very learningful year for all of us. So I think in terms of the corporate challenges, we face challenges right from how will we drive the company in a work from home environment. I mean, as I've grown up in my professional career, I always wanted to show up as the first person in the office at 9 or 9:30 a.m. in the morning, and would be the last person to get out of the office at whatever time kind of it finishes. So I never had that belief that people can start working from home. But a year later, almost a year later, today we have made it compulsory that we are now a remote working company, except the factory and the production people who really cannot really do too much about it. Everybody else has been working from home. And I realized that if you trust people and give them enough space with their families in the more comfortable environments, I think the productivity has gone really high. So today, when I actually look at a year back versus today, I believe that my complete team's productivity has really gone up. So I think the biggest challenge was we were not really prepared for it. But as Chakri said, if you have the right people around you, they will tell you what are the right things to do. So we adopted the right technology, the right tools at the right time to kind of get over it. And I think it has worked in our favor, most of it. I think the second challenge was that during the lockdown, whatever you say, we are a part of the essential products company. We were still getting country delight at our home, but I think our factory was closed for multiple reasons. That even the people at your production factory, they were a little scared to come, and we were also not sure what are the right norms, whether we should basically put them into danger or not. But I think it just happened that after a month, we decided that if we keep it kind of shut, then the business may really get impacted for a long run. So I think we spoke to our team members, and all of them were extremely kind of keen to come back. But obviously, we wanted to be sure that all of them are safe. So under the right guidelines, we let them join back. There were women who had kids at home, who had elder people at home, and we wanted to be very sure that if they come back to work, we really do not put their families into danger along with them. So I think that was a really big challenge. My wife, I got the news of that we were expecting. Even after that, I was kind of sure that although it would also put us into danger, it is very important for me to kind of go there on a daily basis, and people should see me. I mean, they may not really have to do some too much with me, but I think if they see me, they'll feel confident that the things around are right. So we help those families. In fact, during those times, the biggest challenge was if you are a bootstrap company, if you're not a cash rich company, how do you really plan the salaries of the people? But I'm extremely happy to tell that not just that we paid our people, we also helped them to kind of buy those essentials for their families which were needed during the time of lockdown. So I think all those things have now paid us over the last 1 year. I think none of those single people who were, I mean, we talk about those migrant stories, people going to their villages. I think none of our team member, they went to their villages when the team needed them. And I think all of them have been coming over the last 1 year every day to our factory, and it gives me that feeling of pride that people are still connected. They may not be able to come and join us and talk to us or over a video call on a daily basis, but they still think that we are around them. So I think that feeling has really gone well with the people.
Thank you, Prasoon. I'm sure listeners would have taken many lessons from you. That whenever you are building a business, build a business keeping solutions in mind. So if you start from the solution, you might have a new business coming your way. And sometimes you can also look at what are your hidden passions. As you shared that from the childhood, you were engaged in cooking, and how that whole passion came out when you were starting a new business. Well said, Prasoon. May I now move to Suhail? Suhail, this whole online business is developing, and many players are coming, and it is bringing in new challenges. People are, finding that a lot of people are entering into their accounts and hacking their online business accounts. So what do you see that going forward, this online business would create a challenge, or people will find ways to have more secure online business?
No, so I think obviously online business comes with its own set of challenges, but that's true for any new business, right? So all new businesses have challenges. I think what is important is as you scale, you learn new things, you learn the new risks of doing business, and you quickly figure out ways of sort of managing them, right? So I think no business comes without its own risks, and this is a very rapidly evolving space as companies build out non-traditional technology-enabled businesses. More and more of technology risks will sort of come to the fore, right? So I think you have to, at one level, understand that is bound to happen. I think you have to first start with acceptance that I don't think anyone can come up with a product which is not bound to a technology risk, which is not bound to a fraud risk, right? So as long as you're aware and as long as your systems are agile enough that they can identify them quickly enough and solve for them before they become like sort of mainstream, I think that's sort of the core of it, right? And when UPI payments started, I was told 1 in 27 transactions was a fraud transaction. Today, I think we talk about fraud transactions in like less than like 0.001% of the transactions, right? So similarly, as tap on card, where you just tap your card on a machine started, there were so many fraud transactions. I think people have over time figured out how to solve for that. I think now government is promoting just simply tap your card on a phone, right? And I'm sure all of us have seen videos of how people can use that to actually take out your money from your card while you are not even aware, right? So there are inherent risks of any business. But that was true even for conventional businesses, right? When you were operating on a cash economy, there was always the risk of counterfeit notes, and people found better and better ways of like faking new currency notes, right? So I think you have to be aware that there will be risks. I think you have to start with that position of acceptance, because if you keep on defending that no, I am secure, then you will never learn and never grow, right? So as long as you're aware there are inherent risks and as long as you're watchful of them, I think the industry is smart enough, India has deep enough tech talent to solve for most of these, right? So, and I think therefore you have to be a bit more, I would say, cautiously hopeful that you will sort of figure out all risks as they come and solve for them before they get widespread.
See, there are 3 different age groups. One is older generation, say my generation. Then your younger generation, which is middle age. And then there are children, today's children. Now, all these 3 different age groups have a different mindset to online. Okay. So what would you suggest or you think going forward that will give confidence to older generation to get onto online?
So I think there are 2 ways, right? One is make the product simple enough for anyone to use it, right? And again, I'm not trying to like boast about what BharatPe is doing, but if you think of our merchant, many of them are in like tier 3, tier 4 cities. Many of them are not necessarily as well educated. Many of them don't even have a smartphone. Some who do have started using smartphone only recently, right? So I think the product has to be simple enough for everyone to first understand, right? Because if it becomes too complicated, a lot of the people who've not used technology all their life will not be able to use it and will not be able to adopt, right? So I think that's one. The second part of it is inherent comfort with technology and thinking how secure it is, right? So people who've sort of born in this age, people who are now like turning into their mid 20s have probably the first screen they probably ever used is a phone screen, right? Unless I like probably having my first computer, which was a desktop when I had just entered college, right? So so I think so this generation will find it very comfortable to use technology, and they understand the risks of it. But for I think some of the people who come from my generation or older, you have to also over communicate the simplicity of using digital and the security of the product, right? So I think that's sort of point two. And point three is luck plays along sometimes, right? So demonetization and now sort of COVID has made people a lot more comfortable with technology than what they were before, right? All of us are talking on video screens. I would normally do one video conference a quarter. Now I do like 2 a day, 4 a day. My parents had never ordered anything online in their life. Uh, but now all my groceries come from Amazon, Big Basket, and the likes, right? My parents had never, like, my dad is was a senior SBI professional. He was not using digital banking. He was the head of SBI International, and hadn't even logged into his digital bank account. Now all payments are sort of online, right? So I think sometimes you need an external shock like this to sort of fast track adoption of a more convenient and a better way. But I think you can't always rely on external shocks. So I think there is a lot which needs to be done on making products simpler and easier to use, and sort of over communicating both the challenges and the risks. I think there was a very interesting survey someone had done where I think a company in Brazil was selling credit cards to its consumers. One, and they targeted two different messages to two different groups. The first group got the messages of all the benefits of the credit card and how their life will like sort of revolutionize after using the card. The second group got only bad messages on how credit card can be risky and the hidden charges on a credit card, etc., etc. Not surprisingly, people realized the second group, which was shown all the risks, actually had a better adoption of credit card and a higher usage, higher ticket size, right? Because once you understand the challenges in a particular product, you always can figure out ways to sort of overcome that and still use it effectively, right? So I think therefore same goes for digital businesses. We need to sort of be more upfront about the challenges of using this and tell people how to be cautious about it, tell people how to avoid those pitfalls versus trying to hide behind the carpet and saying there are no pitfalls, right? So so I think, yeah, so that's sort of my answer. I think more education, more awareness of risks, and sort of a simpler user interface and simpler products is sort of what will drive it for the some of the older generation.
Well said, Suhail. I think all those people who are listening to you, it's a great lesson for them that be upfront. Tell people what is the downside of using anything that is there, and that will create a huge amount of confidence, and people will come forward and try and use that rather than keeping things under the carpet. Let me now move back to Chakradhar. Now you've raised a lot of money recently. So what is your future plan going forward? How you want to use that money, and what are the new products that you are thinking of bringing in your portfolio?
Yeah, Anilji, basically, so there were two reasons we raised money. Actually, we were pretty adequately capitalized, but with COVID and with uncertainty around the corner, we sort of raised to capitalize the business well during times of uncertainty, and to take care of any unforeseen scenarios, because we didn't want any further unforeseen scenario to question or to put the business at any significant risk. But apart from that, what Country Delight in the last 6-7 years, we have figured out a few things. One, we've figured out what our consumers want, and what our consumers want are products associated with natural wellness, where our promise is to deliver pure, fresh, and minimally processed food products. The second thing we figured is that we have built a business model that lends itself to a lot of a universe of products around the brand promise which we have created. Which is and the third thing that we have done is we've become pretty good at establishing new product categories from a customer point of view, and also establish supply chains relevant to that, given our experience in fresh and perishable products. So now we are leveraging these experiences to build a bigger basket of products around the customer. So milk was our entry into a doorstep, which we took 4-5 years to figure out. Then we scaled it up across geographies during 2017-18. Then we added milk products during 18-19 and 19-20. During 2020, we've added breads and eggs, again all under the promise of purity, freshness, and minimal processing. So now we are entering the broader basket of food essentials. So we are launching fresh fruits and vegetables. We're launching a bunch of bakery products. We're launching cold pressed oils. So here the attempt is twofold. One is to get a right product where we want to give a superior quality product at an affordable price to our customers. We have an established distribution channel with our customers, so because we directly reach them 25-26 times a month, the idea is to just leverage on this distribution channel and add more products that essentially saves a lot of helps us give good products at a very nice price point. The third thing is we have a fresh supply chain. So typically the products that you see in the market, which are in, let's say, in general trade or modern trade format, by virtue of the longer shelf lives that they have, require them to add some sort of preservatives to ensure that the shelf life is longer. But with our brand, the whole idea is shorter shelf life, order fresh and consume fresh. So we are every product that we launch is oriented towards freshness. So the entire supply chain which we've built across 6-7 states, we are leveraging that to launch more categories. And one of the key areas of focus for us this year is fruits and vegetables as a category. We see that despite the number of startups that are there in the space, from a consumer point of view, there is a large opportunity to be tapped into by giving a superior quality product at a near normal price or at a near current price to the customer.
Thank you very much, Chakravarti. Prasoon, tell me, during this COVID-19 time, did you see any perceptible, noticeable behavioral change in your consumers? And if you did, what are the lessons that you would like to share with the people who joined us?
So I'll take 2-3 examples in terms of the changes which we have seen in the consumer behavior. So I'll take one example. The first example about organic. We don't sell organic, we sell fresh, natural, and preservative-free food. But I'll take a very different example called organic. So today, because people are sitting at home, the entire market of organic fruits, vegetables, and other perishables, which we always thought is a product of the rich. I'm living in Udaipur for the last 2 months with my parents, and I've seen that organic from being a word into the rich people's dictionary has actually gone down to probably every household. People are now saving money on travel. People are now saving money on many other things which they were basically doing pre-COVID time. And I think because of that change, today you will see that a lot of this organic category on the Amazon, which is probably one of the largest marketplace in India, has grown significantly. So probably that is what also tells you that people are getting more conscious about what they are eating, what they are consuming. The second example would be about the buying habits. So as Chakri rightly said, the food and the consumables category on most of the large marketplaces was still very small. People used to prefer going to the nearby kirana store and buying stuff. I'm not just talking about India. I'm even talking about countries like US, where shopping is not something which people do every day. They would probably do on the weekends, but they really enjoy it. An average American would basically take his or her family to a supermarket every weekend, and they love that entire experience. Even in that country, the category of food and the grocery, that category has grown on e-commerce significantly. And I can say that probably when you talk about the number of X times, it is almost 10x of the pre-COVID times on all the large marketplaces and the smaller marketplaces that we see today. I think the third behavior, which I will actually quote it from my own experience. So people never wanted to try food. People were kind of happy about, coming back home and eating dal chawal and, going to bed every night. When the people were, sitting at homes, a lot of people went adventurous because they didn't have too much to do, beyond working and spending time with their family. All they could do was, have that adventurous time in the kitchen or, trying different food. So the the Indians who are not known to really experiment their foods too much, I'm talking about the traditional Indian mentality. I think that experimentation has gone really high. So today you will find people who really did not know about what energy bar was or what a green tea was. I'm talking about a traditional Indian who has like a black tea like 5 times. These people have replaced the black tea with either a lemon tea or a green tea at least 20% of those number of times that green tea has been consumed. And again, this is not a trend in India per se. There's a trend across the globe. I'll quote a number. There is a company, there's a brand which is into healthy chips or healthy snacks. Today, this brand, which was probably worth the size of around 50 crore annual business that they used to do on Amazon.com, their today's business on Amazon.com is 250 crores annually from one flavor. I'm not even saying the number of products that these people have. It's called Quest Chips. If you go on Amazon.com and if you search for Quest Chips, so it's a quicker company, and thus the size of the market itself and the shift in the consumer behavior tells us a lot about how people have changed. Today, you will find people spending that 1 hour that they used to spend in traveling, spending on health. I see people doing online yoga session. Like I have a trainer coming at home for yoga for the last 2.5 years, and that changed my life. And that person was a very local Delhi guy, but I recommended that person to my sister and her family in the US. Now my coach, out of 10 customers he has, 8 customers are based in the US, and they've got really crazy about his yoga. They are able to pay, they are able to access these online classes through this guy. So I think that entire paradigm of how we used to see businesses, how we used to look at accessibility of newer stuff has changed. So I think which has also benefited us quite a large. From being present in probably only 2 countries pre-COVID, we've expanded our presence to almost 8 countries now, and we are actually growing. Like there is a decent, significant repeat coming every month, and we are expanding our production capacity from where we are today to almost 10 times. Looking at the next 5 years, what Suhail was saying. I think these are some positive trends that have really come out during the COVID times.
Thank you very much, Soon. Let me move to Suhail again. Suhail, what would you actually like to have to people can secure their transactions? What can be done to secure their transaction, assuming that I am doing online transactions and there is a fraud? Okay, how some insurance policy or something can be taken by given to me to ensure that now my money is safe?
Yeah. No, so I think it's about detecting a fraud has happened. Money is typically safe, right? So, by the way, I don't know many people know this or not. Credit cards, anytime a fraud happens, you obviously get your money back. That's very obvious that a lot of people know. But actually, on cards, there is a chargeback insurance which always happens. Even so far so, and there are cases even in India, it's not only US, that if you pay, let's say, ₹1,00,000 to stay in a hotel, a fancy hotel, and then you come back from the hotel and you say, I didn't like the hotel, I think they fleeced me by charging me ₹1,00,000. The credit card company has to return that money, right? So this is like a very extreme example. Obviously, not a lot of people will do it, and obviously, if a credit card company sees you doing this very often, they will sort of block your credit card and never give you a new one. But I think it is about detect. First, obviously, you should try and avoid a transaction fraud happening, and second, you should sort of be a bit more thoughtful about seeing your bills and transaction history, right? So if you see your transaction history and you find a fraud, there is no way the money will not come back. The first, how do you sort of prevent from getting into that loop? I think a lot of transactions happen and a lot of fraud transactions only happen because of two reasons. One is on phone. And on phone, the simplest way to protect it is by having a two-factor authentication, right? So everyone should switch on two-factor authentication if they have not. I know it adds 2-3 seconds to your transaction by having to put one more pin, but the probability of a transaction sort of getting fraud through that is very, very low. And I think the second way of avoiding sort of fraudulent transaction is to, on the credit card side, is you should basically not let anyone handle your card, right? At least away from your eyes, right? So because a lot of cards get sort of imprinted and reused, right? So I think these are the two big frauds, right? Someone taking your card details and sort of imprinting it and using it for a fraudulent transaction. Don't give your card to anyone unless you are around. And B, sort of on mobile phones, and a two-factor authentication solves for that, right? So at least at BharatPe, we do roughly 25 lakh transactions a day, and we only get like 17, 18 sort of fraud transaction alerts a day. And all those 17 transaction cases are always where we sort of have gone back to the person and said, why didn't you enable a two-factor authentication? Because these are all single-factor ones. Especially a lot of people, for example, allowing a card or a Google Pay or an Apple Pay on their phone without even a password, right? So I think avoid, like, take a bit of convenience out of it if you're sort of worried. If you're especially the types who doesn't look at their transaction history, right? So I don't look at my transaction history at all. I don't even look at my credit card bill. I normally pay it as is. So therefore, at least for someone like me, having a two-factor authentication is very, very important. If you are very diligent about it and about seeing your transaction on a weekly, daily basis at the end of the day, then I think it's fine. You can always claim back. Most of the payment companies, whether they are credit card companies or UPI-based companies like us, typically refund the money in a 48-hour period, even if it sometimes means we haven't got the money back yet, because as a consumer we want to trust you, right? If we later realize it was not a fraud transaction, we will come back to you and deduct the money back from you, right? So typically just be watchful of your transaction history and be sort of as far as possible have a two-factor authentication, right? So I think there is not much to be worried about.
Thank you very much, Ved. Let me come back to Chakradhar. Chakradhar, I think we've got only 8-10 minutes to go. So I'll give each one of you 2-3 minutes to, what kind of, support the startup would actually expect government to give it to you, give it to all the startups who want to get into this, so that the real mission that Prime Minister Modi has brought about, Startup India, really succeeds. So in your view, what do you think government should be doing for the startups so that they have a more seamless journey going forward? So each one of you can give your perspective on that.
Anilji, I mean, broadly, the government has been taking a lot of initiatives, and we keep seeing business getting easier. But two, three things which I feel could add a lot more is the amount of effort or the whole fear around starting a new business, where there is a lot of paperwork involved. You need to talk to a CA. There is a lot of documentation involved. And during the early years of your business, a lot of these filings people are not even aware of. So a good place where you are at least made aware of these basic aspects, and a very seamless online system where these filings can be done could be a big boon for people in the early days, because even in our early days, most of the mistakes that we had been making were due to lack of awareness more than anything. So awareness and ease of execution of whatever needs to be done from a compliance point of view when you start your company new would be one of the key things which I would say that would help a lot. The second is the whole angel ecosystem has been a very vibrant part of helping startups. So any lack of clarity or ambiguity around the taxation regarding for angel investing, where individuals contribute and help companies like us in their very earlier parts of the journey where risks are significant. If the angels are supported adequately through government, whether it's in terms of tax incentives or the basic framework around investing, that would also help a lot, Anilji.
Prasoon, would you like to also share your perspective on this?
Sure. So I think my personal take or my personal experience has been that the government has done a lot of its part in terms of framing the right laws or having those right policies. I think what has really not happened is the sensitization in the bureaucracy. So today the Indian entrepreneurs they face challenges not because the laws are not there. I mean, we won this National Entrepreneurship Award by the Government of India. We are registered with Startup India. We are like everywhere in terms of wherever a startup needs to be there. But when we were sending out our first shipment to the US, the customs guy at the port, they created all the blockage that they could because probably of their own interest and whatever. I still think that India, in terms of sensitizing the bureaucrats, that there is a difference between a newly born baby, who will take some time to learn, who will take some time to stand, who will take some time to eat on its own, who will take some time to basically understand the practicalities, and between those fully grown adult companies who have those battery of people around to kind of manage everything on the ground. We were almost on the verge of losing 30-35 lakhs because we have a perishable product, and because this customs officer for whatever their whimsical stuff, we had to then reach out to the joint secretary and to the ministry to basically explain our position. We were basically bringing dollars to the country. We were sending a legible shipment, and I mean, it was very funny to kind of see that objection. Like, हमारा एक flavor होता है masala, and this guy on the ground, he said, because you are sending masala in our case is a flavor, you need a certificate from the Spice Board of India. And now who the hell knows what Spice Board of India is? And we had tough time explaining this guy, sir, we have masala flavor. It is not spices that we are basically sending. I still think the politicians, they have understanding. They are trying to help the companies, the ruling party and the opposition party. But I think the sensitization in the bureaucrats. Chakri said about the angel tax. We got the entire matter sorted, but a new commissioner came and he said that I will open the file on some other clause, and you don't know which law you are basically breaking, because this like 5 years back, when we raised our first money, and he will threaten you, and you are a small company. So I think that sensitization needs to happen. The bureaucrats are the people who have to really execute the stuff on the ground, implement the stuff on the ground, and probably that attitude, that nature has to be changed. Probably that one-to-one meeting between the bureaucracy and the ecosystem, probably beyond the politicians, we have to understand the bureaucrats. So I think that's where the effort needs to go.
Thank you, Prasun. Suhail, what's your perspective on this?
So I think in general, governments have done an incredible job over the last 5-10 years, right? So I think, I, to be honest, don't have too much to ask. I think two things which still sometimes bother me, I think, is India is a large country, very complex country. Therefore, there are multiple regulators. I feel sometimes they don't necessarily talk to each other, or are not suggesting the same sort of approach, right? So, for example, in financial services, I come across like RBI and SEBI quite often. And sometimes I feel they have slightly different point of view, and therefore slightly different sort of regulations, right? So we raise money from Sequoia, which routes its money through Mauritius. As per SEBI, Mauritius is most favored nation. As per RBI, it's not fit and proper because it's in the grey list, right? So it sort of puts a bit of confusion. And again, this is not a problem with the laws. I think the laws have been really thoughtful and have been built over a period of years of experience. I think for a young company like me, it's sort of difficult to understand who all do I need to talk to be fully compliant, right? So I think a bit more sort of ease of doing that, bit more like, guys, BharatPe or fintech industry, this is the go-to sort of team for you for everything. And if they need to like sort of coordinate with other ministries, they would. Versus like I having to go and first learn every time who all I need to talk to and then talking to them. I think there's a bit of a challenge. I think the second is when is the right time to sort of focus on governance versus when is the right time to sort of focus on regulation is a important distinction. And I'm not saying government gets it wrong. I think more often than not they get it right. I think we are going through as a country a lot of transformation. Technology has led to a lot of transformation. Therefore, we are seeing situations which have never been envisaged in the laws which were written, like let's say 5 years back, right? So, when to handhold, like to Prasun's point, like new baby, let it first get on its feet and govern it till then, or regulate it like so early that it doesn't like even sort of ever have a chance of growing, right? So I think that's the distinction. Again, I think 8 out of 10 times government, I'm sure, gets it right. I think just be a bit more thoughtful around that and a bit more clear around that is sort of the second ask I would have.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely talking to all of you. And I'm sure all those people who joined this webinar would have learned a lot, and who are budding startups in the country. They would be able to learn from your experience and grow from there. So I'd like to thank 3 of you to come here and share your experience. And on behalf of SHM, I am really grateful to you. Thank you very much, and it's nice talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Anil.
Bye.